Hello everyone, welcome back. In the last video, I asked you to do one thing to set aside 10 minutes, sit without your phone, without any input at all, and notice the question that keeps resurfacing in the silence you normally fill with distractions. I want to begin today by saying this. If you did that, even once, even imperfectly, that was not a small thing. That was the beginning of something genuinely real. And everything we discuss today builds directly on top of it. Today we go much deeper into the sphere where most of us spend most of our lives. That is the aesthetic sphere. In the last video, I gave you a map. Today I want to show you precisely what it looks like from the inside. Its intelligence, its seductiveness, its hidden costs, and what Kierkegaard believed was the only genuine way out of it. I also want to address a question that some of you who come from contemplative or meditative traditions may be sitting with. Because on the surface, the aesthetic mode of observation and mindful awareness look similar. I also want to show you precisely why they are not. By the end of this video, you will understand not just what the aesthetic life is, but why it is so difficult to leave, and what the first real movement away from it looks like. So let me begin. Let me begin this discussion today with something that is easy to miss, but I believe it is important and essential to get right. The aesthetic sphere, you must understand, is not simply about pleasure seeking or shallow living. It is a coherent, internally consistent philosophy of life, one that many highly intelligent, deeply sensitive people adopt and defend with considerable sophistication. If you think the aesthete is simply a shallow person who hasn't thought things through, you will completely misunderstand both the appeal of this way of living and why Kierkegaard took it so seriously. Kierkegaard presents the aesthete most fully through a character. He simply calls A as in alphabet, English alphabet A, the unnamed author of the first volume of either order. A is witty, perceptive, and extraordinarily self aware. His famous essay Crop Rotation sets out a philosophy of life built entirely around one central goal, and that is the avoidance of boredom. And his method is not crude. He is not simply chasing some cheap thrills. He has developed what amounts to a, a form of art, if you will. The art of managing experience so that it never becomes stale, it never becomes ordinary, it never loses its charge. So here is the insight from Kierkegaard I found most penetrating. The aesthete ultimately brings an attitude of disinterested, disengaged contemplation to life as a whole. His life, he views life rather as a spectacle to be severed, rather than as something involving projects or tasks or roles that he's supposed to carry out. His is the perspective of a spectator rather than a player. He watches his own life as if from a distance, curating it, arranging it, extracting from it whatever he finds most interesting. But he's never willing to fully enter it as a player, as a participant. That's not his goal. The aesthete recommends quite explicitly rejecting anything whatsoever that involves the self in relationships of genuine interdependence. No deep friendships because friendship creates obligation. No marriage because marriage requires you to show up even when the charm of the relationship is long gone. No vocation either because vocation again uh, demands that you give yourself to something beyond your own experience of it. On the surface, this looks like freedom. In reality, Kierkegaard argues it is perhaps the most sophisticated form of self imprisonment available out there because it steals the self, or rather, it cages the self inside its own experience and leaves it permanently on the surface of existence, moving restlessly from one thing to another thing in the hope of satisfaction without any real accumulation, without any real choice, real building, and definitely no real becoming. Now, I want to take a pause here and address something very, very directly because I think it is genuinely important. It's a genuinely important philosophical question. Some of you who come from contemplative traditions, such as different, there are many forms of Buddhist meditative mindfulness practices. Some of these people may be thinking, isn't the manner in which the aesthete is acting quite similar to the way we are trained? We are trained to observe sensations without identification. We're supposed to maintain a clear, dispassionate awareness of experience without being swept away by it. Is the aesthete not doing something that is structurally similar to what meditators do all the time? I think it's a genuine question, and it's a sharp observation. And the surface resemblance is also real. But the difference appears when you look more carefully. And this difference is very fundamental, and it goes to the very root of what each practice is actually trying to achieve. The aesthete observes experience in order to extract maximum stimulation out of it, while remaining free all the time from making any commitments to anything. His disengagement is in the service of his own pleasure. His freedom from boredom is the goal. His preservation of infinite optionality is the goal. Underneath what looks like equanimity is a very, very refined form of clinging. Clinging to novelty, clinging to the quality of spectacle, clinging to a self that must remain free and uncommitted and obviously uh, apparently in control. The moment the spectacle becomes ordinary, he needs a new one. He moves on. His apparent freedom is entirely conditional on things remaining interesting to him. So this is very selfish. Now, on the contrary, the Buddhist mindfulness practice, and I'm speaking here of serious contemplative practice, not some watered down mindfulness of corporate wellness programs. So we are doing something entirely different. It is not an observation in the service of itself that wants to remain free and pleasured. It is observation that progressively reveals the absence of a fixed self that needs protecting from experience in the very first place. The meditator is not standing back, is not stepping back from the experience to extract pleasure from it. The meditator is recognizing the empty, luminous nature of experience itself, including the nature of the one who is observing. I hope you can begin to see the difference now. And the fruit of genuine contemplative practice is not withdrawal from commitment. It is a greater the goal is to develop greater compassion, greater engagement with suffering, greater willingness to be present to the full weight of another person's reality. For example, the bodhisattva ideal is the complete inversion of the aesthetic stance. Right? It is the willingness to remain in the midst of suffering indefinitely out of compassion for everyone else. And this is supposed to be the deepest form of commitment imaginable, and the precise opposite, therefore, of the aesthete's careful, self protective, pleasure seeking distance from others. To put it more precisely, I'll try to do my best. The aesthete observes in order to possess experience more perfectly. The contemplative meditator observes in order to release the illusion of a possessor. One is refined self centeredness, the other points towards the dissolution of the center that makes self centeredness possible in the first place. Kierkegaard himself would have understood this distinction. His religious sphere, as we will see, points towards something structurally similar, which is perhaps why his work resonated so deeply with some of the Japanese Buddhist thinkers who encountered his work through in translation. Now let me bring this discussion back to the aesthetic sphere from the perspective of our lived reality, everyday lived reality, because Kierkegaard's portrait of A is not a matter of mere historical curiosity. It is a description of a default mode of contemporary urban life, and it has been made more seductive and more difficult to escape than anything he could have imagined. Think about, for example, the architecture of the of the platforms we use every day. They're designed by some of the most like extraordinarily intelligent engineers and psychologists to replicate precisely the aesthetic sphere that Kierkegaard describes in his philosophical framework. Infinite novelty, a lot of variety, and there is a perceptual promise that's always lingering around that there lies something even more interesting just beyond the next scroll. In this mode, you don't require any depth, any commitment. It's all about pure stimulation, pure spectatorship, pure aesthetic experience, available at any moment on demand. Kierkegaard wrote in his own time about what he called the press, the media of his day, creating a public of passive spectators who consumed opinions and sensations without ever becoming genuinely moved to action or genuine inwardness. He described the result as a process of leveling in which genuine individual excellence, genuine individual calling, genuine depth of selfhood is flattened out by the pressure to consume what everyone else is consuming, to hold the opinions that everyone else is holding. Now, in our day and age, we have simply built a faster, more personalized, even more addictive versions of the same machine. And underneath all of this, Kierkegaard identifies something that the aesthete himself rarely acknowledges, and that is despair. It's not something dramatic, there's no visible crisis. This is a quiet structural despair that comes from the fact that the self is built entirely on experience, entirely on the outside, you know, and it does not have any foundation. It is always dependent on the next stimulus. And the next stimulus always, eventually becomes familiar, stale, and then it also loses its charm, and then, you know, there is this endless clinging. So aesthete, just to use an analogy, is on a treadmill from which he cannot get off. Not because he lacks intelligence to see it, but because the alternative, genuine commitment and depth is one of those things that, terrifies him more than boredom does. So now we come to the last part of the video. In this particular part, I want to discuss something practical, in terms of what you can take away from the foregoing discussion. So let's discuss what is the way out of this mode. And I want you to be very precise, because Kierkegaard is not simply offering some simple prescriptions, as in the case of a self-help kind of a prescription. The movement out of the aesthetic sphere is not about giving up pleasure or becoming, grimly dutiful or religious or withdrawn, something like that. See, the aesthetic dimension of life enjoys beauty, experience, sensation, remains present in every sphere. What changes, is the relationship to the whole. Instead of being the organizing principle of life, it becomes one dimension of life organized around something deeper. The first movement out of the aesthetic sphere is what Kierkegaard calls in the either or. And we will go deep into this concept in one of the dedicated videos, upcoming videos. But I wanted to share the essential point, and it is this. The aesthete's fundamental strategy is to avoid the either or at all costs, to keep every door open, to make no choice, to refuse to choose. Because choice means limitation, and limitation feels like loss. Kierkegaard Kierkegaard's question is, what if the refusal to choose is itself the deepest loss? What if the self that keeps every door open is precisely because of that a self that never becomes anything? He's not asking you to make a grand, dramatic, life changing decision today. He's asking you to notice something much smaller, but far more fundamental, far more precise. The difference between the times in your life when you are genuinely engaged, genuinely present, genuinely participating in something beyond your own experience of it, and the times when you are in the spectator mode, consuming, scrolling, watching, waiting for something more interesting to arrive in life, you already know what the difference feels like. You know what it is to be fully present in something, fully absorbed in something. It could be a conversation, it could be a piece of work that you've taken up, it could be a relationship, it could just be a moment with yourself. And you know what it is going to, when you're going through the motions, you know what's happening. This is very different from waiting for something better to happen. Kierkegaard is asking you to take that distinction very, very seriously. To ask which mode you are in more often, and to ask what it would cost you to shift the balance. So, here is one practical thing I want to leave you with this week. Choose one area, one activity in your life, one relationship, or one piece of work, any activity for this work, for this week. Engage with it as a participant rather than as a mere spectator. Not evaluating it, not curating your experience of it, not keeping one eye on something interesting about to arrive. Just fully be there, fully absorbed, fully in it, and notice what happens, both to the quality of the experience and to your sense of yourself within it while doing that activity. That shift from being a spectator to a participant, a full participant, from consumer to engaged self, is the first real movement out of the aesthetic sphere. Now, it is definitely no doubt small, it is very quiet transition. It is in Kierkegaard framework the beginning of what is called the examined life, right? So do that, try it. In the next video, we're going to we go deeply into the next sphere, which is the ethical sphere, the life of commitment, the life of duty, role playing, and we ask with you know real honesty what it gives us, what it costs us, and what it leaves permanently untouched. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.